It's been a while since I made my how to drive fast in Secondlife video, so I'm just gonna do a little update. I think I'm gonna call this thing How to Drive with Firestorm 7.1.11. So let's just get into our car here. And this is a pretty good crossing car. It's the latest car here. Just turn the background sound down a little bit. Anyway, let's just see what kind of results we get with our current setup. And then if we get good results, I'll talk a little bit about the setup and how I arrived at it. So yeah, we're doing about 45, 50. And again, these are pretty rough areas to drive in here in Jugo. But we'll see. So we had a little loss of a camera there. Not a complete disaster. This is one of the roughest spots right here for reasons that I'm going to describe in just a moment. Let's just see if we can make it back to our shop. And I'll speed up a little bit. Maybe about 70 or so. These speeds are normally pretty quick for Secondlife, but they can still be done, and even with PBR and even with high settings or very high settings, maybe not necessarily ultra, but pretty close to ultra settings. With the current Firestorm iteration, I'm not really sure whether it's going to work on the default viewer, but let me just fix our camera here. Oh, maybe not. I had a few really bad crossings here earlier, but it's behaving pretty well now. Let's just see if we can make it home. If we make it home, then I'll discuss whether or not our current settings are actually effective and why. Now, if you're wondering about that little icon thing that's in the top right hand corner, that just shows you what my various keystrokes are and whether I move the mouse or whether I press the mouse button and so on. This is probably the worst section right here for reasons that are relatively new since PBR has become popular. And once we get into our preferences, we'll try to describe what exactly is my read on what's going on under the hood. And it's difficult to know because they don't really tell you. You don't have a way of finding out for sure what the causal factor is when it comes to bad sim crossing or when it comes to bad viewer performance. But I do want to describe at least two separate concepts that seem like they're the same thing, but they are not. The first one is the concept of FPS, and we're all familiar with that. And right now I'm getting about 80 FPS. As I pull into my shop here, we are stabilizing at about 90 to 100 FPS. So we're in pretty good shape on FPS. Let's just leave the car. And I'm going to open up my preferences graphics You'll see what I have it set to. So currently the performance slider is set to high, draw distance of 152, which is just about right for driving. And you can see what the various LODs are. This correlates to just about the same as Ultra in Firestorm 6.7. Because when you crank this up to Ultra, which I have a preset called PBR Midday, that will essentially amp everything up, and you don't see there's a whole lot of difference with what you can observe, and there's a reason for that. Let me go back to my driving preset. I got a question mark there because I'm still trying to figure out exactly what is it that makes Firestorm 7.7 or 7.1.11 not do that well for driving. And I believe I have figured out that the reason is texture load. So how did I get this thing to perform as well as the old Firestorm? Well, the answer is first setting it not to complete Ultra, because that's just too much for driving. The old Firestorm before PBR you could do that, but now not so much. And I've got a 4070 Ti, pretty strong GPU. It's found in rendering here, and what I do is I check this box, restrict maximum texture resolution, and I set it to 1024. And if you don't check that box, what happens is you load all of these, there's probably thousands of them on a drive, textures, and there are trees and inside people's homes and stuff like that, where everybody has uploaded the largest possible resolution they can get, which is now 2048, and that's 4 times the amount of information. It's not double the amount of information, because this is always squared. This isn't 1024, it's 1024 times 1024. When you go to a 2048, which is a 4K texture, it's 2048 times 2048. So it's always the square of what this number is. And this, 1024 squared versus 2048 squared, it goes up by a factor of 4. So you have to load 4 times the amount of information through your viewer going through the HTTP servers that serve the textures now. And so this one change that I've made has made it much easier to do driving. But there's one big thing that you have to do, and I've noticed that because it caches the old larger textures, it doesn't like it when the cache is not cleared when you do this, because when you do this checkbox, you have to restart Firestorm. So the process is going to be check first set this to not Ultra, unless you really have a supercomputer. Then we go to texture rendering, check this box, 1024, and then finally we go to network and files, directories, clear inventory cache, clear cache. And then you say okay, and then go and restart Firestorm, and then try driving. So let's just see what happens if we drive using 2048 textures. I'll just see if I can do this. And I'm not sure if I can show the whole process here on the video, but what I'll do is we'll clear the cache, go back to graphics, rendering, uncheck this, general, and then set to my preset default. This is what I use for developing. So it doesn't look as good now because we're not seeing the 2048 textures. So we'll just stop Firestorm and we'll bring it back in. after it clears the cache, of course. Oh, the other thing I didn't mention is the smaller the cache, up to a point, the smaller the better. It's the direct opposite of what they tell you. So 2048 is a pretty good number. And the reason is that the larger caches just have a hard time with sim crossing. I'm not sure why that is. There's a lot of stuff I don't know why, I just know that it works. Anyway. So now, as you can see, things look much nicer because all this stuff is now 2048 textures. And the thing I was going to mention before is that FPS is, right now it's maxed out at 158. So FPS is not the same as stutters. Stutters are where your processor and your processing system and all the things that are related to it are just not being able to handle the load that it's being asked to deal with. And that's exactly what happens when you enter a sim. Like I've got a few that are about 3 or 4 sims down this way. Just get my draw distance correct here, about 140. We enter a sim that is just absolutely over-textured, and usually what happens is, at first it might start off good, but once you've done 3 or 4 of them and the cache starts filling up, it just becomes untenable. You end up with a driving situation where it's just going to, you'll get massive stutters. This is one of them. Not quite the worst, and we haven't filled the cache yet, so still not doing too bad, but you can see we're starting to get performance degradation already. It's generally pretty good for a while until I do maybe a loop of these sims or come back. Or maybe it's just decided it's going to work better for me right now. Yeah, there we go. So this right there, as you see, I didn't even have control of the vehicle there. That's a stutter. So that was not an issue we had before. Yeah, this cache is starting to fill up. We've seen these sims several times now. And let's just see what happens with our performance as we continue. Getting a little bit of that kind of stuttering going on here. The quality of the textures is much better, I admit. You know, here there's a stutter, and the 2048 textures they look a lot better. But the system is really having a hard time keeping up with the massive texture load. So if I come back to my shop, again, my performance is not that great. I'm having a hard time controlling the vehicle. And if I come out here and then start looking around in different directions, sometimes it'll go into a freeze mode. There we go. So you can see how it kind of freezes and stutters and everything. That is not FPS. This is the graphics system there. That's a total freeze. The graphics system is just not able to handle things because of this stuttering. Now we've gotten into stutter mode. At this point now, let's see if we can drive with it. We've sort of filled things up. Now remember, if we use a bigger cache, it actually, once it fills up, it becomes even more difficult because every sim crossing, it's trying to deal with a larger cache. And so now you can see we've got just very much degraded performance. Now it's affected our FPS, which is now tanked. Before we were getting really high numbers. Now it's kind of stuck at 40 60. It was much higher before. We did not have this problem when I was just going with 1024 textures. So you can see it works a little bit, and it works great if you're not going to be doing driving. By all means, leave it set on Ultra, leave it set on 2048. But if you are going to drive, you don't want to deal with these stutters. You need to follow the plan of checking that box, limit to 1024, go to high, not ultra, and clear your cache. So I hope this works for you. Again, this is always a work in progress. We don't have any kind of definitive information. This should not be considered the be-all, end-all factual information. This is just what I have found to be the case so far. And right now it's mid-March 2025. We're using Firestorm 7.1.11, and well, I hope it works for you. So let me know if you get similar results or maybe better.